Have you discovered what your superpower is?
On today's show, we're going to be interviewing SuperPower Expert Tonya Dawn Recla. Stay tuned.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Awaken Your Spirit. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Aaron Garcia.
And I'm Veronica Mendez Garcia. And our show's about inspiration, motivation, and developing the mindset to live a happy and abundant life.
We are live here every Mondays and Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern. And if you guys would like to join us here on the show live every week, we are live on Facebook and on YouTube. On Facebook, you just click on that little bell notification to get reminders each week. And if you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell icon so you always know when we have a new video posted. Today, we are excited because we have our very special guest, Tonya Dawn Recla, who's going to be joining with us shortly. But before we get into our guests and the topics of today, we always like to start off with our first segment of our show, which is our inspirational moment with Veronica. So
inspirational moments is when I like to read something inspirational. And today I have a writing from after meditating. I journal, and this is what comes out. So it says, "Thank you for connecting with us. Know that you are all loved. Each and every one of you have special gifts to share with this world. Look around you. Look at everything that has already been created. Everything you need is already here. Sorry. There is no lack in this world, only abundance. You are all abundant, and you all deserve to be happy. You can all create the life you want. What brings a smile to your face? What makes you laugh? Surround yourself with people who will uplift you. Be the one to uplift others. You are all connected. You are all spiritual beings in a human physical body. Love one another, forgive those who have hurt you, and raise the vibration to feel joy, love, and happiness. All of you together can truly make a difference."
Absolutely. If you guys enjoyed that, give us some hearts, give us some likes. And if you know that there's anybody that can benefit from the message of this show today, please share this with them, because as we always say, we never know who this message is going to impact. And somebody may just need to hear this for today. And I love the inspirational moments because they really hit home with a lot of people. It's universal. And I think we should all share and uplift our vibrations for the good of everybody, especially in these times today. It's very important. And we're all creators. We're all manifestors. And we get to create whatever it is we want in our life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what I always say is there's no competition because we're all one, and we're all together, and there's more than enough to go around.
So if you guys are joining with us in the show, give us your comments here into the feed. If you have questions throughout the show, you can post those here as well, and we will get to those to the best of our ability. Let us know if you're coming from. If you're new to the show, tell us you're new, because we'd love to say hello to you as well. So I will want to bring in our special guest for today, and Veronica is going to introduce her for us.
All right. So our guest today is Tonya Dawn Recla, and as the Executive Director of SuperPower Experts and creator of the SuperPower Up Network, the #1 podcast network for personal development and spiritual growth, Tonya Dawn Recla spends her days convincing people superpowers are real and recruiting other powerful mutants. During her career as a government special agent, she explored the human psyche, honored her superpowers, and cracked the code of enlightened self-actualization. Tonya continues as a lifelong student of energy manipulation, transmutation, intentional molecular creation, and full communion with the divine. She believes everyone has the power to create multidimensional existence and master the human experience. Let's welcome to the show, Tonya Dawn Recla.
Hey, Tonya, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hello. Well, thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure to be a part of this.
Absolutely. So we've been connected over the last few years, and we you know, we've known of each other, but it's like the first time we've got the chance to really sit down and talk. And we've just been really fascinated on the things that you've done, and we want to know more about. And I think my first question would be, you have a background in the CIA and in special intelligence. What was that experience like for you?
Well, that's a great question. It was one of those, yeah, you know, it depends on which angle I approach it from. I did work with the CIA. I didn't work for them. I worked for an entity with the military, and that kind of backs my story up even a little bit further. I just wrapped up my master's degree in a field of critical race theory, and right at about the time 9/11 happened, and ended up in an Army recruiter's office. I would love to say that it was a totally consciously aware thing on my part. I think I was kind of in control of myself a little bit at that time, but in retrospect, it really makes zero sense at all how all of that transpired. And in the midst of that, ended up in the counterintelligence arena as first an enlisted Army soldier, and then got recruited by an agency and was able to go and do some pretty miraculous things and in a really short time frame. And so I can only assume that the divine had a really clear plan. In retrospect, I can piece it all together, but certainly it wasn't clear in the moment. But I was able to do surveillance and investigations against suspected individuals suspected of espionage here in the States. So I got to do Justin will tell you, because he was in the field also, and he's like, you got to do all the sexy stuff, and I really did. And it was, I mean, there were moments I was like, how I'm getting paid for this? Like, this is pretty crazy. So you know, it was great. I mean, it was tough. It was probably one of the most grueling times of my existence. There's something about espionage that really lets you glimpse like the depths of depravity that humanity carries, because it's such an intentional crime. That was disturbing, and eventually I think probably led to me leaving the field, because it was challenging to be transparent in an arena that really where you couldn't be. So inevitably I grew beyond that and went into other fields. So it was an interesting experience, to say the least.
Yeah. Wow. Well, my question, because I've always been interested in like superpowers and the sixth sense and that type of thing. So can you tell the audience what is your superpower or superpowers that you have?
Great question. Great question. I think in order to do that, the philosophy kind of needs to be spoken to a little bit. And at SuperPower Experts, we believe that we all, out through the collective connections, have access to all superpowers. There's really nothing unique about any of us as an individual when you get at those high levels of abstraction. However, our awareness gets filtered into what we're capable of working with and comprehending. And so it's really helpful to have some constructs and some tools and some guidelines along the way, so we can kind of follow the divine's voice throughout all of it. And maybe have some fun while we're here. And so the concept of superpowers was truly divinely guided. We take zero credit in the creation of all of this. We absolutely take credit for obedience and discipline and listening and all that stuff, sometimes not so willingly, but eventually we get around to it. And so the superpower dialogue was really obscure to me. Like I've master's degree, critical thinking, counterintelligence agent, right? So you can imagine, I'm sure you can relate that, you know, you start on some of these trajectories and you have some of these visions and meditations and you're like, wow, you know, and next thing I know, I'm reading oracle cards. And so it just kind of ran its course. And then, so when the superpower conversation came up, it wasn't so much that it was a shock, but it still wasn't real comfortable at all. And so I just did what I've always done with spirit, and just start asking, like, what is this? Where are we taking this? And trusted the visions that I was seeing. And so eventually it got broken into what we call our predisposed superpower. So we believe that we have a consciousness that connects in with the divine, and we kind of program ourselves to be certain things here and to have certain attributes and to get born into certain arenas and to all of those things that compile to make us the uniqueness of who we are. We like to tell people we don't throw anything out. So those annoyances that you have, those idiosyncrasies, like they all kind of guide us somewhere and help us understand more your purpose and how you planned to be that voice, that body, that embodiment of the divine here. And so the predisposal piece really speaks more to the challenges that we have with certain powers that we really wanted to work with. So for instance, I have a couple of what we call our Cat 2 superpowers, 3 of them: empathy, psychic ability, and mind reading. Well, the challenge in those is that nobody ever told me I could hear other people's thoughts. So I thought they were mine for a really long time. Nobody told me I could feel other people's feelings. I thought they were mine for a very long period of time. The psychic visions, right? You start thinking like that's truth. Well, psychic energy is just another frequency of information. And if you don't know how to interpret it through your intuitive channel that connects you to the divine, you think that the world's coming to an end, right? You think that this is going to happen, right? Because that's what you're seeing. And without the symbolic interpretation that can only happen through the divine lens, you're running amok. And unfortunately, we have a lot of practitioners then also leading other people astray with that as well. And so you can see how the dialogue starts to get really much more complex. The biggest one that was the most fun to play with initially, my husband named, which was temporal precognition. When I started realizing I can see multiple futures, people say, well, can you see the future? I'm like, well, which one do you want? Like it's like ticker tape. Like I can see all of them. And it depends on if you respond from a certain frequency, the potentiality of different outcomes changes, right? So it's like the probability is constantly shifting depending on in every moment what we choose, right? And so people could see that in that moment, if you give into that constriction and you feed it and you put emotion on top of it, then you pile a story on top of it, and then you let it create your projection in front of you, you've now set yourself up for the next 2 weeks of your existence, depending on what frequency you're sitting in, right? And it creates this kind of hell loop that's inevitable because you don't realize that it's all dictated by how you're choosing to be in that particular moment. Well, once I was able to see that, I could help people understand better just how essential every single moment is. And if we separate from fear, which is separating from God, right? We'll go back to the original kind of flaw, if you will, the original apple situation. Then you live outside of Eden, if you will. And so it's as you can tell, it's an in-depth dialogue, and it doesn't stop with parlor tricks, but we like to look at those because they're indicators where we're going.
Yeah. And I can only imagine when you're first starting to experience this. You mentioned before how you think it's all you, especially, and I've seen this with Veronica, our daughter as well. My daughter it's Veronica's daughter from her previous marriage, but she's very intuitive as well. And a lot of our work that we do is we work on the emotional level of people. And what I've seen with you and also with our daughter is how they start to feel like when they're in a certain mood and they're just not feeling their best and they don't know why, like nothing happened. And then we realize because they were around somebody else and they're picking up their energy, and it's like she's just soaking that up. So for you, when your experience is how did you start to separate what was yours and what was somebody else's?
That's a great question. Really, I wasn't able to do that until I was willing to acknowledge that most of the stuff that people were teaching on it didn't apply to me. That was a really kind of heady thing to face because it was an arena that I didn't necessarily know a whole lot about. I certainly hadn't spent decades studying, and yet the experts that were supposed to be telling me how to deal with empathy, I would listen and kind of read a book or whatever. It didn't connect. And if I tried to deploy those techniques, they didn't work. Well, that led me on this whole discovery to realize that most people who think that they're empathic actually get their intuition through emotional energy. Very different strategy at play there. So true empaths, which is my design, I have very little use for emotional energy, like other than when I'm working with clients. But most people broadcast their fear so readily that it's much more of a challenge for me to get through and see the truth, or it was, in the developmental process, than it is to think that they were my emotions, right? So what we see in more often are individuals who imagine like you have this stream. Let's make it just a water stream, but it could be a data stream, an energy stream, but we'll just use water for now. So it's just this stream, and it's choppy and it's rough and everything, but right in the middle is this clear channel, right? And it's smooth and easy, right? That's that intuitive channel, but it exists in this, in an emotional energy stream, if you will. And those individuals almost inevitably, I haven't seen a design yet, there's some work that they're here to do that requires them to be tapped in to that energy. It's a connection that we have with people. If you look at how we typically talk, most people only communicate in commiserating, right? What's health wise or scariness wise or money wise or whatever it is, we like to meet in the misery of things. And that's that how we connect in with the very human aspects of who we are. The goal with those individuals is to get that channel widened, right? So the easy, smooth kind of space in the middle is more home for them, and they can stay there more frequently than on either one of those sides, right? On the sides, like branches are batting you in the face and you're gripping the edge because you're in fear, right? And people are swimming by you. When you're in the channel, it's like, oh, I can see it, I can touch it, I can reach into it, I can help others out of it, right? I can offer the hand, but I don't have to be in it. And that's a very different strategy. And so for me, once I was able to see empathy for exactly what it was and acknowledge, like, I'm fairly devoid of emotion. And that's a weird thing to admit in our society. And so nuanced study, if you will, an investigation and trial and error is what created the conviction to be able to speak to it like that. And we've helped a lot of people get clarity on why they were trying to deploy empathy or empath techniques and it didn't work for them, and vice versa, right? People are like, oh, just trust your feelings. I was like, I don't have any, like, and if I trust yours, like, yours aren't any better, right? So it's like, where am I supposed to go with that? Yeah. Well, only a true empath would know the pain of that. It's like, that's not real. Like, I know it's not real, but you have to be able to see through it and then know where to go for your guidance.
Mm.
Like
yeah.
that.
So, like for somebody who's having trouble like separating it, it's like, it's almost like they have to work with that energy, or, you know, if they're feeling other people,
Mm-hmm.
do they have to, you know, have more of an awareness of like, okay, I'm good one moment, I got around this person, and then all of a sudden I felt emotion or pain or whatever it was. So is it more of an awareness thing that they have to separate that for them? Like,
that's
for
a really great question. There's you know, we both want to give encouragement and hope and say, like, look, here are some steps you can take, but we also want to not paint the picture that this is simple. And we're super, super, super complex and super multifaceted. And I think that's a reason why we're seeing such an upsurge in the personal development, spiritual growth arenas, because everybody's trying to make sense of this. Well, there's a difference between trying to make sense of it and teaching someone as you're trying to make sense of it versus teaching someone once you've synthesized the material and have tested it and are confident in the techniques that you're deploying. Right. Mm-hmm. And so you can see that there's a lot of misinformation along the way. And the reason why I think people aren't real interested in that second version, where there's the testing and the trial and error, is because it's just not simple. Right. We want the single pill. We want the 1, 2, 3 steps. So in answer to your question, it's both a factor of the individual's development, mm-hmm. Their commitment to listening to the divine, right? Because I have yet to see a situation where people can truly develop into these spaces without fully surrendering. Mm-hmm. And there's a responsibility that goes with that. And not everybody's interested in taking up that mantle, right? And in living that kind of an existence. If you really want to understand this stuff, that's the pathway, right? You really truly have to be willing to both understand yourself, master your own self-dominion to the point where you can then turn every aspect of yourself over to spirit. That's how you move into communion with the divine. That's how you get to wield these powers, because you've proven that come hell or high water, you're not backing off from that commitment, and you are tested along the way. This is not fluffiness, right? This is the woo-woo community, I think, likes to be like, oh, drink some ayahuasca and you'll be good. And it's like, no, like, sure, like that, but the awakening is just the first step, right? And then it's like nobody's talking about the long journey that happens after that fact. Mm-hmm. And so we have a lot of real disenchanted people. And so regardless of whether you're truly an empath or if you get your intuition through emotional energy, which we have assessments for that. But regardless of either one of those things, here's a great test you can do. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by emotion, first of all, you got to know how to get to that observer role, right? You got to know how to connect to spirit and how to remove yourself from the situation. If you can't do that, folks, that's a primary step. Don't bother trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Because all you can do is understand it from the aspect of the person that's hijacked you, right? That lower frequency piece that's taken control, and it's not designed to understand, right? But it's going to tell you a whole lot of stories and pretend that it understands. And so you're better off in an emotional upheaval just to be in the emotion. And if you can get out, right? Try not to react, try not to destroy relationships in the process. But if you can take a step back and take a breath and say, okay, what am I really seeing here? And that sometimes is enough. Just count to 10, right? But then you can say, okay, is this mine? Right? And if you can maybe exercise a little bit of imagination, you could say, okay, you can ask, is this mine? Right? And if you can feel the like twinges of it start to dissipate a little bit, start to loosen up a bit, go with that, right? Keep pushing it a little bit and go, okay, if it's somebody else's, please like let it flow through me or give it back to them or whatever, or give it back to them with love, like whatever feels good to you. And just say, I need space to see clearly right now, right? And this is particularly challenging in couples, in families, right? Because we're so enmeshed, and then you throw COVID on top of it and quarantine. It's like, nobody knows what end is up. And so, but that's a really great technique. It works for two reasons. One, it helps to reframe it in your mind, but two, it just gives you a pause. If you can break a pattern of behavior that says emotion, there's a threat, I must react, right? That's fight or flight. If you can do whatever you can, whatever it takes to just in that moment, take a breath, that you're steps ahead of the game. And that will lead you to be able to kind of start to sort through and go, okay, is this mine? And then it's like, okay, am I needing to see something in this, right? And that would be more for our intuitive folks or our emotional energy intuitive folks. So you can tell it's not a simple answer, but I want to give people hope that you can do a lot of this on your own.
Yeah.
It just takes incredible self-study and direction and perseverance.
Yeah. And I think it's like something that we have to experience and work through, because it could be different for everyone, right? It's not just like there's no cookie cutter, like you mentioned earlier.
There's no cookie cutter, but there are threads. There are similarities in the journey. And so we were kind of sitting in the same space early on of like, nobody's journey is the same. Like, I was in a high degree of a resistance early on with taking up the direction that I felt I was being given, because it was like, just because that's what I went through doesn't mean that everybody's going to, or just because that's what I'm seeing doesn't mean that's what everybody else is going to do. That's its own kind of crutch, typically. Usually when I hear people saying that, are like, oh, people aren't ready to hear this. It's like, usually that means you're not ready to say it, right? And so we want to be really cautious with that. While initially we may come to that realization, if we camp out anywhere too long, it's typically from our own resistance. And so there is a point where it's like, it just doesn't matter that everybody's going to go through it differently. We have to start speaking to it. We have to start giving it a construct, because the abstract is so incredibly surreal. There's no friction. There's nothing to bounce off of. You really have to start framing up things, even if it's not perfect, because we don't really have words, and thoughts don't really do a good job of encapsulating the divine. And so, but we have to get closer, right? We can just push the needle a little bit. And so yes, to what you said, there is a extreme diversity in it, but there are a lot of similarities too that we can at least start speaking to.
Yeah.
So then we're talking about, superpowers. I like the term, because I'm a big, I grew up in comic books, and I was even reading on your website, and I think you put up a Doctor Strange quote. I'm like, oh, I love that movie. And so we have some resonance here, but I think a lot of us, there's that part of us that is very intrigued about this concept of superpower, but we think that it's something outside of us, that it's only in the comic book, it's only in the movies. They might heighten that a little bit more, for theatrical effects. Mm-hmm. But there is a part of us that has access to call it these divine gifts, from intuition to be able to see, different things. And what would, especially when you have clients coming in with working with you, what is it that really drives people to want to explore that, to get to that point? You said there's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of things we have to all work through to get to that point, to really identify what our superpowers are. And it's not easy. It's like you were in the military, it's like going through boot camp. It's not gonna be like this easy thing, but you come out on the other side a different person. Why would somebody want to move into that direction? What really pushes them to take that leap?
That's a fantastic question. I did a whole study on the concept of grit. So there was a book about it by the same title, and they looked at, you mentioned the military. They looked at it was one of the academies was discovering that they could assess for aptitude, academic aptitude, and success in terms of the classroom. What they were having a really difficult time doing was assessing who, when faced in the fire, right? Who when they were getting forged, would persevere. And they found that they were having trouble testing that. And so a group came in and devised a way of doing that. I'm kind of missing the details, but the point is that that's a deep study. I've been in the human behavior space since, inception. 25 years ago, I was studying intercultural communication and critical race theory. And so it's like how we tick and how we work and all of these other things are super fascinating. And at the same time, it's this, once you hit a certain point of development, right? Like we're all climbing Maslow's hierarchy. And once you kind of start to peter out at the top there, you're like, okay, but then what? And as a collective, I think we've gotten, there are enough of us, the numbers I keep hearing, about 1%, have gotten to a place where it's like, okay, now what? Of that 1%, less than 5% really do much with that and move into embodying or integrating some of these concepts. But for those of us who jump, it's usually because we've exhausted everything else. And so I'd like to give you some beautiful, like lovely answer that says, oh, la, we wake up and we just go. Usually it's more of like the Job story, and it's like you're down and out, you're, bleeding, you're crying, you're, whatever, you're broke, you lost all your friends, you've lost whatever the disaster, the tower card in the tarot, whatever it is for you. There's usually some sort of dark night of the soul where it's like, I have literally tried everything else. And every time I, as the human that I am, attempt it, I always come up short, and I usually end up screwing something up and or hurting something or myself or someone else, right? And we're stubborn, from that regard. Not everybody. I've met beautiful, delightful souls who didn't need that lesson, but most of us, we're pretty well convinced we can do it on our own. And even if we give lip service to God or to spirit or the creator, whatever else we want to do, when it comes to balancing a checkbook or strategizing our business or disciplining our children, that's not usually the first place we turn. It takes incredible discipline to, in every moment, in all things, stay in that communion and have that conversation always. We like to hide. And so what the superpower thing does, I think, is it kind of bridges that. And when I got that early on, God and I had many dialogues about the superpower thing before coming out of that. We had a corporate counterintelligence firm. I'm a serious person. I'm educated, darn it. Like, we don't talk about superpowers. I never watched superhero shows. Like, I wasn't into fantasy, sci-fi. I never watched Neverending Story till I met my husband, 12 years ago.
Classic.
This was my world, right? And so it's like superpowers. And I think, obviously, in retrospect, God's like, Tonya probably needs to play a little bit more in her existence. And so paired me up with the perfect playmate in that, and he knows all things superpowers. And so, of course, now we're completely marveled out. We've got all of we collect the pop characters, the superheroes, right? So we've got like crosses that we collect on a wall, and we've got pop characters that we collect that are superheroes. So it's like we're pretty juxtaposed. But the superhero thing, when the podcast started, which was my show, was the first show. It was the only show for a while. And I got the clear guidance to bring everyone into the same conversation and to uplift others who are doing similar things. And so an interview style show made sense, and talk about superpowers. I'm like, what? You know, so every single question the first question I ask of every single interview I've ever done is, what are your superpowers? And I mean, goodness, that was 4.5 years. We get over 2 million downloads monthly on that network now. I don't even know how many shows I've done at this point. But what was so amazing, I don't care who it was, multi-PhD holders, retired brigadier generals, no one's refused to answer the question. And everybody lights up a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like I've talked to people that was like, I'm like fangirl, like, oh my gosh, like they're on my show. And they're like, I might have superpowers. And you're like, yeah, like you don't see them. And it's just such a brilliant tie-in for all of us to remind ourselves, like, we are so much greater than we realize. Yeah. And we all are. And so it's this commonality, it's this thread that ties us, our hope, our desire for more. And ultimately, all we want is to learn to love and to learn to love each other and to receive love. And if we can do that, because somehow, some way, we can see the superpowers in us and we can see them in other people, then, you know, by golly, I think it's an okay thread. And it's meant for mass consumption. God's very clear on what this mission is. And he's going to get people's attention. And so it's like, you know, and so far be it for me to argue about the branding early on. It took a lot, though, to take on something like SuperPower Act. I remember when we went for the federal trademark and I was like, or trade name, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this, you know, but, you know, anyway, our greatest source of humility.
I was going to say that it sounds like ours, because before we started doing the show, we got a message like, do a show. And we're like, a show? Like, on what? Like, what are we going to talk about? And it kind of morphed. At first it was Aaron and Veronica Live, and then we changed it to Awaken Your Spirit. But it does, you know, you're challenged, and it's like, but we listen and we go for it.
And you mentioned stubbornness.
I'm not going to say you might resonate with that there.
I knew you're picking up on me. No, but
I have superpowers.
Yeah, I get it. But I remember that because I resisted that for like a year. We had talked about it, but it was like, you know, that fear kicks in. How is this going to work out, or how are you know, what are people going to think about this? And so it's like our own stuff gets in the way,
right?
Where it's like that higher part of us is like, just do it, you'll be fine. But we can't see that all the time.
No,
I think for a lot of people, we get stuck in our journey, especially when we want to unleash our superpower, whatever that is. And I know it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
Polarities is, what are people going to think about this? Is this too much? Or people going to put it down? And I think we're all gifted with this when we come to this world, but it gets shut down.
Right.
And based on like, don't sit down. You know, kids are very creative. They're very imaginative. You know, your imaginary friends we can create, and then we're told that's not good to do when you're, you know, 15 or 20 or 25. And we lose that creative part of us. We disconnect from that higher part of ourselves, and we take on like layers of experiences called the emotional journey. And yeah, it feels like that stubbornness when, what are people going to think? I'm used to doing this for so long, to do something completely different, and like almost like you're taking a U-turn and going a different direction.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to transition to that process?
That's again a great question. I've been shown things here over the last few years that really make me believe that I am fully convinced at this point in a multidimensional existence, at least at certain parts of the phase, because the experiences that I've been having are that we have remembrances of being exactly how you described, right? Shut down, stubborn, afraid, all of the, we know that we can remember it. We have cells in our body that remember it. Like, there's no mistaking the fact that we believe we traverse through that, right? And thus making that real. We also, once you hit a certain point of development, we call it the abstract frequency, communion with the divine, whatever you want to call it, you start to realize you've been there all along also. And so to hold both simultaneously starts to kind of get kind of quirky. But the reason why we teach that and why we think it's important is because it's so challenging for us to see ourselves. That's why the observer role, right? Coming out of ourselves and seeing, regardless of your belief, of your faith, your religiosity, spirituality, if you can in any way touch the divine and even attempt to see through its eyes, then you know who you are undeniably. And you know you've been that all along. And you know that you showed up in all of those situations exactly as that. And what got put on top of it was the overlay. And we identify with the overlay. And when you can start pulling that overlay back, you actually can dissipate those timelines. They never happen like you remember them. Nobody ever thinks about you the way that you are afraid that they think about you. Most people are too worried about themselves, right? Like we just don't see it that way, but we have all of our own blooper reels going on and we only see everybody else's highlights.
Yeah.
We got to flip that a little bit and say, okay, like I get that I have highlights too. And that means that this person who I've put up on this pedestal also has bloopers, right? Not as a way to judge, but as a way to connect us all to say, okay, if this is how I perceive of them, why is it so challenging for me to think that others might perceive of me that way? Well, it is challenging, and most of us are only capable of holding one consciousness at a time. And so if we can at least connect into God and say, okay, how do you see me? How do you see me? And that's where I'll be honest with you. Like if you can lean into a religious following, a spiritual following, Christianity's easy, it's readily accessible. If you can really feel that and resonate with it and follow the guidance and trust in Jesus and all of that, then that's great. If that's not your bag of tricks, then find something that you can use to as your guiding light in all of this, because the challenge in it all is the temptation, right? The temptation to fear, the temptation to be stubborn, the temptation to resist, the temptation to judge ourselves, the temptation to feel horribly about ourselves, the temptation to bring up all of those overlays, that if we can get that vantage point, we can see, wait a second, like it wasn't that way at all. If you'd indulge me, I have a story. It's a little bit of a workaround, but I think I can illustrate this if you're interested.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wrote my book, War, Watch, Assess, and React, The Ultimate Guide to Personal Power and Safety, back in 2007. And in that, I share a story being raped by one of the members on my surveillance team. But that wasn't the first time, right? 16 years prior, the same thing had occurred. And in that process, and the way I tell the story is I did nothing, right? And I dealt with the guilt of that and the torture of that from 16 on, right? I did nothing. I did nothing. Why didn't I do anything? Why didn't I protect myself? Why did I searched into it, like, what was I thinking? Right? Totally. I mean, and wrote a book about it, everything. And for sure that happened. For sure that was a big part of that story.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, I was about a couple years ago, I think now, I was standing in the kitchen with Neva, our 10-year-old, who, runs SuperPower Kids. She's over 150,000 downloads monthly herself, and, best-selling author, all the stuff that prove why this is important work, right? She and I were standing in the kitchen, we were talking, and as the divine kind of moved, she just asked this seemingly innocuous question, and I started answering it. And she had asked me about the original rape situation when I was 16. And I started describing it to her. And she stops me. She goes, "Mom, you said no?" I was like, "Well, yeah, She's like, "You did do something."
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, "What happened next?" And I told her, she's like, "Mom, you pushed him. Like, you did do something." And it was like, and I couldn't stop telling the story. I was like, wait, what am I talking about here? And it dawned on me, that's how it happened. It happened that way. And she's looking at me and what I saw through her eyes was power, right? Like the acknowledgement of you fought, all these things. And for whatever reason, and the other story wasn't false. It was another layer of what occurred there, but that was the one that my consciousness picked up on and ran with.
Mm.
And I thought I knew something about myself because of that story. I mean, my whole world was and it's not like that was the first time that had ever occurred, but it took her in her innocence. Mm-hmm. She brought me back to that moment where right prior to that, I knew all of that about myself. And that's really the magic of what she does. We have her working in our programs and stuff like that with certain clients, because she regresses you back to the moment where you took on a limited belief about yourself and helps you rewrite it. No, totally not even, she, most of the time she doesn't know what she's doing. Like, she's not aware of it at a 10-year-old conscious level, right? But we can all do that. We can do that for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if we just hold that mirror up for the divine and say, look how I see you. I know you. I feel you.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of beating each other down, I mean, we'd have a pretty good thing going, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome, because it's like we create our own perception of what happened and how we either reacted or didn't react. And sometimes the other person can bring it out, like, well, because they're seeing it from their point of view. So it's like a different, it takes a different perspective to, realize, like, oh my gosh, like this, they're right.
And we believe
it takes incredible grace to manage yourself in that process. And so to have the development that I do, to have the relationship with God that I do, that I could sit in that moment with her in grace and pleasure and just relish in the beauty of it, and not lambast myself for doing, like, I was young. Yeah. I didn't, and that's if I could share anything with your audience, it's that we do these things not because we're not smart or because we don't know what to do. It's survival. This is what we can do in this moment to say, okay, I got to get through this. And we're not always equipped to deal with it at the highest level. That's how trauma happens in our bodies. And it can be somebody looking at you sideways and you don't know how to deal with it, right? You think that they're mad at you. And as a young person, you don't know how to manage it. And so you store it up inside of you.
Yeah.
There are so many wonderful things we can do with each other and say, hey, it's okay. But do that with yourself too. Mm-hmm. Right? Like have that grace and that love and that compassion with yourself also, because that's the only way to integrate this stuff and move on with it.
Yeah.
And there she is right there saying thank you. She's loving the conversation.
She's awesome. She's really good with social media. So she's got you covered. She's our go-to person in that space.
She'll be
love you too, baby.
I love it. I want to say hello to also Patty Mays is joining us. This is Hello Beauties.
Beautiful.
Welcome everybody to the show. If you guys have any questions for Tonya, please put them here in the comments, because this is a really good deep conversation, because somebody's resonating with us right now, because we all go through our own experiences in some way. We create our own perceptions, our own realities, and it does take other people. That's why we're here together, to help each other. That's why we do this show, is because we realize that we're all here to help, not compete with each other, because sometimes we all need a helping hand. We might be on top sometime, we can help somebody else, but sometimes we need somebody that can help and bring us out of that muck, to bring us out of that dark place, whatever that is. Right. And we all have our own superpowers, our own gifts. And sometimes that could just be the superpower of being able to listen, the superpower of being able to see through somebody's perception and see who they truly are, like you were just mentioning. And what I'm hearing is that this is what you help to develop within people, so that way they can shine and be that light, that person who they came here to be.
Beautiful. Yes. Well, we have an organization that does that. We have a phenomenal team of coaches that run our SuperPower programs for folks that want to do deeper work, such as this, in this vein. And of course, we have the network. So we have our team of podcasters is just absolutely amazing. The absolute perfect group of people to come together to prove that you don't have to have celebrity, you don't have to have platforms. And together we were able to get over 2 million downloads monthly, and it's standing strong. And so people are hungry for this material, folks. They're hungry for what's real. We say it's the only thing that matters, right? Is the conversation on how we can be more real here and what happens as a result of that. And so I say all of that to say that it is truly a collaborative effort. We operate off of a protocol we call synergistic collaboration, where we trust that the energy between us creates. And when we invite the divine into those conversations, we get to simply, be obedient and reap the benefits. And that's a practice, that's a walk we've been on. So we're happy to model that. And we do that in a number of different ways, through SuperPower Experts, through the due diligence work, through the corporate counterintelligence firm, and all of the things that come off of that. But we just happen to be, Jess and I are phenomenal builders, and we work very well together. And so we build systemized, sustainable, self-perpetuating models. And we contend that they're necessary for moving forward. I think what we're seeing right now is the crumbling of anything that wasn't built in what we call divine design. And divine design is sustainable, scalable, self-perpetuating, creates win-win-win solutions for everybody, to include following in the divine's path. So it's super simple when you can see it. You got to kind of dig through all the murk and the mire to be able to see it. But once you can, and it's how nature works, right? You can apply that to business, you can apply that to your families, to your relationships. And when you do, everything's pretty much effortless, right? You just have to kind of keep walking that trajectory. And so, so we do that in a number of ways, but the SuperPower Experts one is by far our most fun playground. And, you know, but we get to play with a lot of really great people there too.
That's awesome. So when you were discovering, like, you know, like your gifts and things like that, you were married at the time, or was it before you got married?
Wow. Well, I would say that marrying Justin is what allowed me to be much more open and to share those abilities with more people. That book that I wrote sat on my hard drive, and it took a few iterations of it to kind of get to where I was comfortable presenting as that. And without his love and support, there's no way I would have. And I think Neva's presence also, because Justin had 2 kids from his first marriage. So here we have 3 children. It's like, what do you want them to know about the world? You know, what do you want to impart on them? And it was like, you know, kind of, you know, put up or shut up at that point. Like I knew what I had gone through, and it's like, are you going to share that, or are you going to keep it to yourself and force them to suffer the same? And so there were a lot of motivating factors, but certainly without the support of Justin, I don't know that I would have, actually, I'm pretty clear, I would not have gone as deeply into the work or felt as supported in going as deeply into the work as I did. But I have recollections through my childhood and everything else, mostly. Yeah, I kind of joke. I said, I just thought I was really smart, you know, because that's what everybody told me. You know, it's like gifted education, you know, I graduated from the honors college at ASU, like all of these things. And it's like,
pardon me? Secrets. You knew all the answers to the test.
That's right. I knew all of them, right? But I didn't know I knew all of them. I just did it. And so it was kind of like, I kind of felt like I'd been cheating the whole time. I was like, oh, wait, I've been talking to God this whole time? Like, that's kind of, you know. So I knew that there was some of that. I wish I had been much more consciously aware when I was an agent, but I was already using some of that. Then the intuitive, I ended up testifying in federal court, which is fairly unheard of because I happened to be the right place, the right time to see the right thing happen. You know, so it's like all along you're like, wait a second. And then you start to feel like a puppet. You're like, who's been controlling this whole time? You know, because it's like, so you go through phases of realization when you start to dissolve yourself into the divine. You're like, oh, wait, hold up. And so I suspect that if I could remove the overlays, I would see that I knew and was consciously aware the whole time. There's still a few, you know, but for the most part, I'm starting to be shown where I knew I was aware of all of it all along. That's just kind of a heady experience. And so I'm taking that one slowly, but certainly the marriage and the exposure that I got through that, the mirroring, right? The friction that happens when we choose to come together with another person, and then expanding that into the family unit, just allowed for a lot more of the polishing where, I hold to what I said earlier. I think that we have a responsibility to live the material, synthesize it, really truly master it, try it out on the brave souls that want to come forward and let us kind of work with it before we ever broadcast it. That's a really kind of a pillar of our platform, is taking responsibility with the abilities that we have. And we're seeing a lot of them being used in really irresponsible ways, and they're doing damage. And so, you know, we kind of advocate for the alternative.
Got it. Wow.
So you and your husband and your daughter all work together with this SuperPower. That's awesome. It reminds me of the
so crazy.
You know, the cartoon, the
Incredibles.
That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's we made a pact I mean, imagine it. Justin and I are both counterintel agents, right? We did some pretty cool stuff in the world, and when we chose to leave that, which was unheard of, people don't leave counterintelligence, we made a pact that we would only do business in places where Neva could be involved. And the reason for that is we knew who she was, to the extent that we were possible of understanding that at the time. And at the very least knew that her trajectory was going to be non-traditional. And so we also committed to her down the road to only build in a way where we could follow whatever she was interested in creating, because most of us aren't taught how to do that, right? Like that, it seems like overindulgence, right? To adhere to a child's whims, but it was so much deeper than that, right? And so initially when she asked for business cards and we told her no, because we're like, that's insane. And she kept asking why. And we're like, well, we don't know, it seems like they're for adults. And she said, why? And I said, I don't know. It's not in the rule book. Right. And so we kind of didn't have a good answer. Yeah. And so we gave her business cards. Well, you know how that story ended up. Like, she did a keynote in front of 2,000 people at 7 and wrote the book and has been running her podcast for 3 years. Right. And so what we're seeing through her is we're seeing the divine personified as the child, which I don't know that we've really seen an embodiment of in a traditional way. Certainly we've had stories and we know they exist, but I don't, for some reason, that just gets left out of the conversations. In fact, Justin and I are doing a deep study of the Old Testament right now, and I'm like, Neva, Josiah was 8 years old and he was king, and so we kind of are finding all of these like clues and stuff, and it's like, well, what is this? Like, obviously she's doing God's work, but there's a lot of obstacles in this world for encouraging a child in this fashion, and so we kind of had to make our own spaces. The few really brave people, Greg Reed being one of them, Steve Olsher another, who are inviting this kid on their stages, and they're like, I don't really know why. Like, a lot of the events she's spoken at, like, no kids aren't even allowed at. And so it's just this weird thing. And so we work a lot with her on, like, how do you hold all of those contradictions, right? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so that's part of the reason why we work together, is because it's so easy to get pulled apart, right? And Justin and I saw that early on. Justin and I started working together, and when I made the decision, it was definitely a we decision, but in that moment, it felt like being pulled, right, between continuing to stay with my husband in the workplace or be at home with my daughter. And it was horrible. It was a horrible thing. But Justin and I both knew that that's really where I needed to be, even when it kind of pulled at our marriage in a way that didn't feel good to us. Like, we love working together. And that was a challenging period of time when we were apart. And then he went to Afghanistan for 6 months when she was 2. And so we've had those moments of like, no, like, we know what it feels like when we're together and when we're in sync. Neva runs 2 or 3 departments or divisions within our organization. She handles all of our direct mailing. She does all the video editing. So we've built systems that truly are scalable and systemizable for just about anybody. We're getting ready to test them in an internship capacity. So we're really excited about that. But when you build well and when you honor the divine and everybody involved, then this stuff is easy, right? Certainly getting to that place was like, we made it, right? We're still together. Everything's good. That's why we got the tattoos. We're in this. So no matter what comes up, we're gonna push through. And sometimes it takes that sort of perseverance.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing that you allowed yourself to listen to her, because most adults, they don't really listen to the children. They're just kids. But I think it's great that you guys were able to just allow her to step up and shine her gifts. And we do that with my daughter. Like, sometimes she'll ask questions just like your daughter, and they seem very similar to me. And she'll ask more questions, like something that an adult would ask, and I answer her. Like, I don't try to hide anything, and I just tell her what it is. And so I don't look at her like a child, but like just as another light.
That's right. And when you can see them that way, it's beautiful. I mean, we did 3 years at Burning Man with her, and she was 7, 8, and 9 when we did that. And I mean, they're capable of so much more than we realize. And Neva woke up out of a dead sleep at 2, demanding to know what a soulmate was.
Wow.
And I said, well, why? And she's like, and she'd seen a vision of her sister with someone, and she's like, he's not her soulmate, Mom. You know, and it was a previous relationship that she had had, and so it was really interesting. But I mean, she's been talking to entities, and Jess and I had the choice to make, like, either, like, she was doing things that I didn't understand, right?
Yeah.
And so it was like, either we just shut it down and tell her that it's not real, or we explore it and look into it and hone our abilities to, maybe she did know what she was doing. And we both had enough experience, Justin in particular, with shutting down certain abilities, that he knew the price of that. And so we were pretty convicted in at least giving her the space to discover for herself whether or not she perceived of it as being real, and before we put our overlay on it. And that goes back, you know, Aaron, to what we were talking about. When you have that overlay and you're blind by it, right, and you think that's who you are, that's how we perceive everybody else too, right? Well, we have these limited perspectives. How could we see a child as being much more than the typical version of a child if we can't even see ourselves that way?
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I told you we can talk all day, but I always want to have a final question before we get going, and we'll give you guys links to how you can connect with Tonya in just a moment. Is somebody's going through processes in their life right now? They might be going through those layers. They might be challenged. They might be going through that time where they tried everything, like we mentioned, and nothing's been working, doing it their way. If they're just starting on this path and on this journey, or trying to figure it all out for themselves, what's one thing that they can do today or tomorrow that can help lead them down this path to maybe discover what their superpower is?
That's a fantastic question. The thing that will serve you best, no matter what the circumstances, no matter how you feel about the circumstances, no matter what you perceive about the circumstances, is always being able to hold to your own internal light. And not everyone knows how to access that. And in fact, what we're seeing in the world right now, in my opinion, is the largest chasm that we've ever seen between the cans and the can-nots. And what I mean by that is, if you can access your internal peace, your light, right, and however you feel about that, connecting that to the divine, then you're able to see things from a very different perspective. If you cannot, then this is a really, really, really challenging time right now. And so do yourself a favor and do this study, if nothing else. And all you have to do is just imagine the tiniest, itty bittiest little pinprick of light. It's in you. First of all, you have to accept that it's in you. There's nothing you can do to get rid of that. Nothing. No, you can get it as small as possible, but it's still there, right? And if it's still there, that means it can get bigger, right? It can expand. So just imagine this little pinprick of light. And if you can, your whole heart chakra lit up, right? If you can, your whole body lit up, right? Become the light body that we know ourselves to be. So regardless of what stage you're at, I recommend continuing in this practice and just getting it bigger and bigger and bigger. But let's start with that little pinprick of light, right? Mm-hmm. Make it a quarter. If that's too big, make it a dime size, right? Just take a deep breath. And maybe the first day it doesn't work. Maybe the second day it doesn't work. But maybe the third day, gosh, maybe it twinkled just a little bit, right? And so you keep going and you keep going, and you'll get it to a dime size. And the next thing you know, you'll get it to a quarter size. And you just sit and you breathe. And 5 minutes, just take 5 minutes out of your day, in the morning and at night, whenever you think about it, take a deep breath and go, okay, this crazy lady said I got this pinprick of light somewhere in me, and just kind of imagine it, right? Maybe you need to just get a little dot and remind yourself, wear a little dot somewhere on you, like a little pinprick of light. That's all you need. And just get it bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you can just do that, and when you get upset, when somebody's making you really mad, just look for the light. Mm-hmm. Just look for the light. If you're having real difficulty, really can't see it, then absolutely make sure first that you're in your body, because that can be challenging. And the way that we do that, we used to teach it to counter intel agents, is focus on feeling the inside of your feet. Sometimes when we're really, 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 really upset, we're not going to get to meditation. We're not going to get to pinprick light. We're not going to be able to do much else, mm-hmm. right? But wiggle your toes. You're mad, wiggle your toes. Okay, that's the best. Wiggle your toes, because what it's going to do is it forces the energy to come out of this amped up headspace, and it's not going to get it into full embodiment, but at least drop it down a little bit, right? Wiggle your toes. Then if you can kind of focus on feeling the inside of your feet, right? We had students coming to us being like, I'm thinking with my feet. I'm thinking with my feet. And it's like, so, because we get upset and we go right here and we shut off everything else. It's a survival mechanism, right? And so just those two exercises, if you can just get in the habit of when you're not able to find peace, just doing that, right? And going to that breaks the habit of reacting, right? We got to break the habit, and it's starting a new habit, but you got to make it a habit. If you can do those two things, everything else will expand from that place.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
And so for people that have been watching, they're watching live now, watching the replay, and they want to find out more about what you guys are doing at SuperPower Experts, how can they find you? How can they reach out?
Brilliant. You can go to superpowerexperts.com. If you're interested in podcasts, certainly we have the podcast network there. We also have the I Am series. That's all free training, weekly messages there. We're just wrapping up Radical Love, and our next series is, I don't know if it's been announced yet, but I'll tease it here a little bit. It's called Across the Divide, Race Matters in Black and White. And so we're going back 25 years and sharing the story of how we dealt with some pretty extreme race issues at ASU back in the day. And I brought back my counterpart from those days. So Mr. Dondrell Swanson will be joining us in that series as we tackle some really difficult conversations and teach people how to navigate them. But we do a lot. We have a lot of fun with that too. So you've got the podcast to listen to. You've got all the free training you could want. And if you want a deeper study, I'm sure you can walk around that website and find a way to connect into something. But we trust you to guide yourself and follow your resonance with it, and just feel into it. And if we're a yes for you, people usually know right away. And then make sure you reach out to us.
And I have listened to the I Am. Is it like a podcast or?
It's a video series.
It's a video series.
I advertise it on my podcast, so I always do a podcast episode about the future series. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you guys should check it out.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for joining with us today. And this has been such a pleasure. Had a lot of fun, and I love the work that you and your family, your daughter, you guys are all doing. Keep up. Just such a blessing to be able to share this with you guys. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you
for inviting me. It's a pleasure. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
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 Well, there you have it. I hope you guys really enjoyed our guest for the day, Tonya Dawn Recla with the SuperPower Experts. Again, you can go to superpowerexperts.com to find out all the things that they're doing, all their programs. If you guys want to discover what your superpower is, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that was, we could have gone on for hours just talking about all this. I love it.
Yeah. And so thank you guys for joining again. You've been watching Awaken Your Spirit. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Aaron Garcia.
And I'm Veronica Mendez Garcia. And we thank you for watching. And, we go live, I don't know if you mentioned, Mondays and Wednesdays, 9 a.m. Pacific.
12 p.m. Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys want to join us live here on the show, you want to get the reminders. If you're watching here on Facebook, make sure you turn on the live notification button to get the reminders. And if you're watching on YouTube, remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and click that little bell icon so you always know when we have a new video posted. So thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.
Have a great day.
Bye.